There can be many factors at play. It's always difficult to talk about sexual assault, and victims or survivors may have a variety of feelings around the experience. It's quite frequent that survivors will feel ashamed of what happened. They may even feel guilty. They may even feel that maybe it was their fault. So they may have all sorts of feelings around the experience that make them really uncomfortable talking about it. So that's one reason why they may not want to report. For some people, it may take a while, and then they will want to do that. So they may start by being able to talk about it with trusted friends, trusted family members, or a professional, and then feel like it's the time they want to report that experience to the police. We can support them in many ways. We can focus on their health and their mental health. I think the bottom line is really to listen, make sure that they know we believe them. We can try to work with them to make sure that they don't feel responsible for the assault, that it's the perpetrator who's responsible. And what we can do that's really important is to identify their needs and identify services that they can access. And that would be, again, I think, very much in the mental health area. And then I think there's a little bit to be said about a longer term approach. I think experiences of sexual assault can really blur the line for victims and survivors between sexuality and violence. And so I think we can work with victims to start, going back to a positive body image, to a feeling good in your body, having a positive idea about sexuality, and really try to see this as something entirely different than the violence that they went through. So sexual assault is really violence. We talked about consent before, and so consent really establishes the difference between sexuality and violence. However, when you go through this, things get really blurry after a while, and I think it's really important to work on this issue with victims. Immigrant and refugee women, well, in many cases, there are two things. They may have gone through really difficult experiences back home that have to do with authorities such as the police. I think that's fairly frequent. It doesn't mean that it's not the case for women in Canada or women who are not immigrant and refugee women. They may also have had bad experiences with authorities, and they think, okay, they don't feel like it's going to do anything to report to the police, so they don't want to do it. They don't trust the police, so they don't want to do it. However, another level is that women and men who do not have legal status in Canada, are at risk when they report to the police, because although the police may not ask them about their immigration status, if it comes to the attention of police officers dealing with them that they do not have legal status in Canada, they may disclose that to immigration authorities, and then the people who do not have status will be at risk of deportation. So I think that's a reality that's really difficult for victims of sexual assault. And that's why I think the important thing is to try to get legal advice if you're in a situation like that. There are legal clinics, community legal clinics that may be able to help. And so it's a good idea to be sure about your status in the country. And if you do not have legal status, to get some advice about what to do. And if you're not reporting to the police for a specific reason of depending on your situation, you may still access other services. Okay, so you can talk to community workers who know what good sexual assault centers and shelters will be able to help people without legal status in Canada. Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind something really general about criminal law. Criminal law is only one area of the law, and it's an area where the burden of proof is really heavy. That means that before someone will be found guilty and punished for a sexual assault, for example, you will have to prove that the sexual assault happened and that the person is responsible for it beyond reasonable doubt. And it takes a lot of evidence, a lot of proof to demonstrate that. So some survivors may be in a situation where, of course, in their experience, it did happen, but there's not the evidence to really show it. And that means that the person that they know is the perpetrator will not be found guilty. And so that can be very frustrating. So it's important for workers to know that so that they can help victims and survivors deal with their expectation regarding the criminal justice system. I also think that another important thing to know is that although it's always hard to talk about sexual assault, and it's hard to help someone who went through this experience, but it can be even harder for certain groups of people. So I think, for example, LGBTQI people, meaning lesbians, gays, bisexuals, intersex people, trans people, have different types of sexualities and also go through experiences of sexual assault and are more vulnerable because there can be a variety of judgments made around their type of sexuality. So again, I always go back to this difference between sexuality and violence. So a worker should know that if they're dealing with people who are a part of the LGBTQ community, perhaps also sex workers. There are groups, HIV positive people, for whom it's difficult to discuss this issue. And the bottom line there would be to focus on the fact that no one should be exposed to violence, that sexual assault is violence, and that your first task as a worker is to listen without judgment.